I'm Julianna Forlano from Absurdity Today. We are here in Denver, Colorado at the National Conference for Media Reform, and you're watching Free Speech TV. I'm lucky enough to have with me today one of the co-founders of Free Press, Robert McChesney. He's also the author of the new book, Digital Disconnect. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Of course you're going to be here.
Yeah,
you put this thing together. Now, your new book, I'm very excited. I want to just jump right in. Your new book talks about how people believe that the internet is going to be a great democratizing force and that there's freedom of expression and all of that. But your book says that that's not necessarily the case. Could you talk about that?
Well, I think that a lot of the claims about how the internet is going to have this magic power and create democracy and freedom and empower people to vanquish corporations and tyrannical governments and the military sort of underestimates the importance of capitalism in the equation and the commercialization of cyberspace and the dominance of crucial policy-making decisions surrounding the internet by corporate concerns, by military concerns that are undermining a lot of the promise of the internet.
What are those specific concerns?
Well, let's just look at, if we look at democratic theory, what are the things that strengthen and undermine democracy? If you look at the list of the things that we know from theory and historical practice, huge amounts of inequality are bad for democracy. The less inequality there is, it's easier to have a functional democracy. We also know that monopoly, huge amounts of economic concentration are bad for democracy. The more diverse your economy, the more competitive it is, the more decentralized it is, the better it is to have a functional democracy. We know that the less militarism there is, the better a democracy is. Militarism has been the death of more than one republic or democracy in human history. And so then the question is, when you look at issues like that, is the internet attacking those problems and lessening them so it's making democracy stronger, or is it encouraging those problems? Mm-hmm. And I think the evidence right now is that in terms of monopoly power, the internet's the greatest agent of monopoly we've ever seen. So it is enhancing monopoly power in the economy.
Meaning there are 4 or 5 great corporations, Amazon, Google,
Yeah,
Facebook.
I mean, it's 13 of the 30 largest publicly traded companies in the economy today are internet related. The ones you named, AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, or others. There are only 2 of the 30 largest are too big to fail banks. So we're talking about enormous collections of monopoly power, huge companies with immense power over government. Basically, they're ungovernable at that size. That undermines democracy. That undermines the notion of we're all in this together, one person, one vote. Inequality is mushrooming. All this money and wealth being generated online is going to very few hands.
Would antitrust laws have anything be able to curb this?
I think in economic theory you have basically 3 options when you have these huge sort of network effects monopolies like Google and Microsoft and Apple and Amazon and the others. You either can try to break them up into several small companies like we did with Standard Oil or AT&T. And I think you can make a pretty strong argument that's not very realistic. With network effects, everything pushes you towards a monopoly. That's why they become monopoly so quickly. Because the one that's the first place company basically everyone has incentive to be on their networks. They go to that. You don't want to be doing social media. Everyone's on Facebook and you're on Joe Blowbook. Well, you can't talk to me if you're on Joe Blowbook. You've got to get on Facebook.
Right.
So that option of breaking them up into multiple firms is less likely. The other options then are you either heavily regulate them to serve the public interest, but they're private monopolies, or you nationalize them and make them public utilities. But those are the range of debates you have. But if you leave it like we have, which is unregulated monopolies, you have the worst of all worlds.
Now, you discussed the militarization of the internet. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about what you're talking about?
Yeah, this hasn't really been talked about a lot, but the Pentagon has declared cyberspace one of their command areas. It's the equivalent now of Africa or Asia or Europe or South America. They've got a whole command area just for cyberspace.
Wow.
And a huge amount of what they're doing now is creating at the National Security Agency and in the military is a cloud where they're collecting data on everything done online, so they know everything that goes on. And then they're not the only ones doing this. At the other side of the coin, commercial interests, Google, Facebook, where they make their money is basically they know everything you do on them. That's their private property. They're using it. And so we have this enormous surveillance being done by the military of individuals and by commercial interests of individuals. And what's most depressing and most disconcerting is that these huge companies are working very closely with the government. They're not an adversarial force. They're not a check on the military. The military is not a check on them. They're very much in cahoots working together harmoniously to increase the surveillance power of the internet And again, for those of us who are over the age of maybe 25 or 30 or 40, if you remember back to the 1990s, the genius of the internet was that you could be anonymous. You weren't being tracked, but you were free. You had privacy. You
could make comments.
You were in control of your fate.
Sure.
All of that's gone. It's completely gone.
What do you think that? I mean, do you think that that is in an effort to quell a potential uprising or potential dissent?
No, I don't think. I mean, I think in the case of the military, monitoring people is their business in the intelligence community, and yeah, they're definitely keeping an eye on dissidents.
Because it sounds like they're just ready that if something should happen, if another Occupy should really gain hold, they could pull the trigger.
There's no question they're going to always be looking for dissidents, and they'll occupy the Occupy people they already monitor. We know that. But I think they're also view it in terms of terrorism and other foreign governments and those concerns too. In terms of the commercial companies that are in surveillance, it's driven by commercial factors. I mean, what's happening online is they've been looking for ways to make money. Google is such a valuable company, or Facebook, because of the information it collects on people. If you get a product for free on the internet, you're not the customer, you're the product. I mean, you're what's being sold to other people. You're making money off of you. They know so much about you, every click you do, everywhere you go. And so they've got all this data, and they're comfortable exchanging this data with the national security agencies, oftentimes getting paid for it, working together, and not just those companies, AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, they all participate in this process. And by liberal democratic theory, having this much sort of surreptitious interaction by such powerful corporations, monopolies, and the government, pretty much without any journalism coverage, no congressional oversight to speak of, pretty much unaccountable. This is not a recipe for a healthy society in the long term.
Right. You mentioned in your book, again called Digital Disconnect, you mentioned in your book that the Arab Spring uprising, the internet was given a lot of credit for the Arab Spring uprising, but that's not necessarily it shouldn't be given as much credit as it has been. Is that accurate?
Well, I think there's a lot of debate about that. I think that, but what shouldn't be given, the notion that Twitter and Facebook are revolutionary vehicles that will invariably promote democracy and lead to self-government and we live happily ever after is preposterous. The fact that Facebook or Twitter can be of great value in moments of upheaval and communication mechanism, I don't think there's any question about that.
Sure.
I was in Wisconsin in 2011 almost every day at the state capitol, and the use of Twitter was essential for people to communicate where to go, where to line up, who is coming where, and making things move much more quickly. What's not going to happen, though, is the use of Twitter isn't going to give people the information to actually govern themselves. It's not. You can't
get that kind of information in 140 characters or less.
And you also can't get that sort of information unless there's someone with the resources to produce it. And one of the great problems I talk about in Digital Disconnect is that it gives the illusion, because people can go to their favorite websites or Facebook pages, that there's this immense amount of information out there. It looks like this overwhelming rainforest. But in terms of actual people covering stuff, doing journalism, that it's research and it's copy edited and proofed and fact checked, it's an information desert out there. We just went through an election in 2012 where the vast majority of election races had zero press coverage. People went into the voting booths knowing nothing about anything except what the TV ads told them.
Right.
A democracy can't survive then, and until we come up with ways to subsidize journalism and content online, so we have independent, competing, uncensored newsrooms covering the community digitally, we aren't going to be able to have a functional democracy.
Again, you mentioned in your book that not allowing any election time ads for candidates would be one of the things that you would suggest in order to address.
Yeah, but the way you have to do that is you have to have journalism, so there's some information.
Right.
And the other countries, most countries have no political TV ads, but they all have very strong public broadcasting networks that air candidate debates for all the races, that have coverage of candidates and races, that cover the elections. If you took all the ads off now, there'd be nothing.
Right.
But
right.
now, so we have a desert.
Right. Maybe the vacuum would hopefully be filled with investigative journalism.
No, it wouldn't be, because there's no money
unlikely.
for it. There's no one. Unless it's volunteers in their pajamas after their day job go out and cover it.
Right.
But there's no money in journalism. Journalism is no longer commercially viable. This is something now that's recognized, but they're not widely saying it. Capitalists are jumping ship. We used to have these conferences here and we'd be whining about Time Warner and all these corporations, how they're screwing up journalism. Well, now they're leaving the game. They don't do journalism anymore. We have in this country well under half the resources per capita going to journalism that we did 25 years ago, and the number's rapidly shrinking. One of the great stories about the internet that's in my book that's not fully appreciated is that advertising is radically changing online. It's not the advertising of Mad Men. It's not the advertising we grew up with where an advertiser supports a website or a magazine or a newspaper. They buy access to the medium, they get their ads shown, they reach their audience, and then whoever publishes the medium takes the money and they can pay their reporters or pay their artists for the content. Now online, advertising is what's called smart advertising. It buys audiences and it finds the audiences wherever they go online, whatever website they're on. It doesn't matter what website they're on.
Yes.
And that means websites like yours, if you were to sell ads, wouldn't get any money or very little from your ads, not enough to support yourself.
Right.
And this has radically changed things in Madison Avenue and Wall Street. They realize there's no longer a way you can make money doing journalism. So they're out of the game. And no, it takes money to do journalism.
And your suggestion for the future of journalism?
Well, I think we have to start by saying, understand it's a public good. It's something the market is not able to provide in sufficient quality or quantity. A free society can't survive without it. It's a public interest obligation of the first order, something the Supreme Court recognized in one of its most famous decisions. It said the creation of a free press is the highest duty of the state, to make sure you have a credible press system. And we have to take that seriously. In my book, I've come up with a couple of suggestions for things we ought to consider. My favorite one is the idea that every American should have a $200 voucher of government money they can give to any nonprofit and non-commercial medium of their choice. That would be a $30 billion public subsidy with no government control over the content. And it would suddenly mean institutions like Free Speech TV, let's say 100,000 people each gave you $200. Well, that's $20 million. Think you guys could
I think we could ask a lot of good questions.
You could hire a lot of journalists, cover a lot of stuff. And we can imagine if the whole country is filled with thousands of free speech TVs doing that. Well, we'd have a democratic heaven instead of a hell.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
We're here at your conference.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm Julianna Forlano. You've been watching Free Speech TV.